Well, thank you all for watching. This is a legislative forum put on by the Idaho Counseling Association. I am Dr. Monique Barber, and I'm a board member of the Idaho Counseling Association. So this is your association. If you're watching this video, you are a member. We're so thankful for you being a part of everything we do here to promote the counseling profession, our professional identity, and advocacy. So that's what we are here today with, is to look at how to gain more perspective around the advocacy we do. So I am joined today by Representative Steve Tanner from District 13. And I'd like to just tell you all a little bit about Representative Tanner. So Representative Tanner comes from a military family. His father was a World War II Navy corpsman who retired as a captain in the Medical Service Corps. This upbringing took Representative Tanner across the globe from San Diego to the Philippines and instilled in him a deep respect for service. His professional background is also diverse, combining high-level technical expertise with a heart for ministry and mental health. He spent years as a data analyst and computer programmer for major firms like AT&T, Bank of America, and Blue Cross of Idaho. We have that in common. Representative Tanner earned a Master of Divinity from Fuller Theological Seminary and a Master's in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Liberty University. He successfully planted and pastored a church for over 5 years, and today he's a licensed professional counselor as well as a state representative. Representative Tanner moved to Idaho nearly a decade ago, motivated by a desire for freedom and a commitment to conservative values. As a licensed professional counselor serving in the State House, Representative Tanner brings an invaluable perspective to a lot of things, to the legislature. He was a critical leader in the effort to help us to defeat, although that seems like a strong word, House Bill 545 last session, standing up for the integrity of our profession. So thank you, Representative Tanner, for all the work you do and for joining us today in this forum to talk about all things advocacy in the counseling profession. I'll open this up. Is there anything else we should know about you?
No, but just hearing you read all that, just makes me wonder what's next.
Yeah. What's next? It is interesting. I think we all were surprised, and maybe it's a homework thing that we didn't know this, but you are both a counselor and a legislator. Can you tell us a little bit about how those identities converge and how that worked for you this last session?
Yeah, frankly, I didn't know how that was going to work either until I got into this, and I did see that happen for me. And a couple different things that I worked on. One was House Bill 545, which we're going to talk about, but also in being on the Health and Welfare Committee this year, and also another bill that I worked on, which became known as Benji's Law, which was about an infant who died out in Nampa, and I got to work with a group of foster parents, and so my clinical background, it integrated nicely into that effort as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, let's switch over to House Bill 545, which was the military chaplain bill. So the military chaplain bill would have allowed for highly qualified chaplains in the military a special pathway for them to get a licensure as a counselor, either as at that first tier LPC or second tier LCPC. In the way the bill was written, it didn't have a requirement for them to have a master's in counseling, although most of them have a master's in divinity with a lot of additional credits. But it didn't specifically have one for counseling. It also didn't write it for chaplains to have had supervised hours by a licensed counselor supervisor or to have passed the NCE. And so there was a lot of issues with this bill specifically in that certainly we weren't saying that they weren't qualified as helpers, but that they were not qualified as professional counselors. Can you tell me a little bit about what going through House Bill 545 was like for you as a legislator and as a counselor, and having your Master's of Divinity as well.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, so all of that was converging. So from just from the point of view of having the MA in clinical mental health counseling, and then the MDiv, I was kind of in a unique position to know the difference between the two degrees. In my Master of Divinity program, we did have like an introductory counseling class that we took. I think there might, and then I had to do a 3-month internship at a hospital, which was probably very similar to the clinical pastoral counseling program that was kind of at the center of this bill.
Yeah.
But so I knew the difference. I knew the difference between the two disciplines, and they were very, very different. And I tried to speak to that, and I don't know how much that really came through. But then as a legislator also, looking at this bill and going through it, and like I have said to you before, that I really didn't even hear about this bill until it already had passed through committee and it was on its way to the floor. And and I told the sponsor I'm not going to support this, and I told her why. And so we talked about it, and there were technical problems with the bill. And then as I got into the bill more and more, and just reading through it, and it leverages another piece of Idaho code, a statute. And as I started to read that, the way that 545 was leveraging that other bill, I felt was just a misappropriation, a misapplication of Idaho law altogether. And it was in that case, it was technically wrong, and therefore should be invalid just on that merit alone. Not even considering the question about expertise.
Yeah.
So so I had all of those angles working. So by the time I found out about it, that's when I think we started to have some conversation, and also with Letty Stradley Bass, we started to have some conversation about it, and I started digging into it. And as I started to figure out more what this bill said it was doing, and as opposed to what it was actually doing, then that's when I was trying to reach out to people, trying to prevent it from progressing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you give us a special view where as counselor advocates on one side, we do the best we can to have these individual conversations, but what you can provide us with is sort of what goes on behind the scenes. And what you're describing is there are a lot of conversations happening between legislators around these bills.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this for people that were born in like the 70s and 80s. There was a special cartoon that talked about how a bill is made and how it makes its way through the legislature. But what I don't remember is sort of the idea that bills are still very personal in that how they're written. They can still have flaws or be misapplied. Can you tell me a little bit about that process, and especially as an advocate, how best do we, I guess I'm asking two different things here. Can you speak a little bit to the personal aspect of bills? And then the other side is, how do we address when we find things that might be misapplied? How best do we go about advocating and showing that in such a way that doesn't feel disrespectful? Certainly you all are people.
Yeah, it's a complicated process, and there's a lot to it. There's a lot to getting a bill across the finish line, getting it signed into law. To answer your question one way, yes, they're very personal. For example, the Benji's Law that I worked on, that was a group of people who were very invested in advocating for adopted kids and kids that have been taken out of homes. And so they had a lot of personal feelings at stake, and they learned how to join together and pool their resources, and they were learning together the legislative process so that they could know how to present it to someone like me, and we could work together to move through it. But yes, then once it gets into the lawmaking process, then the people that are working on it, we have conversation, typically what I do, if it depends on the bill. I mean, if it's a bill where I feel like maybe there's a gray area here, I don't know if there's a First Amendment violation or a Fourth Amendment violation, that might be in here. I'll go check with the Attorney General's office, for example, or an attorney that often 2 or 3 attorneys before settle on a direction. I'll talk with stakeholders. Okay. I think my background in working for corporations, large corporations, has really served me in this way because I've learned how to go to stakeholders, and get their concerns about something that's being developed. Yeah. So yes, there's a lot of that going on behind. But one thing that I do want to say is that for most bills, or a lot of bills, there is something very personal at stake for people. Sometimes they're carrying it for somebody else, or it's an interest, a personal interest to the sponsor, the bill sponsor, and so they have something at stake.
Yeah. I think we saw that. We saw the passion, kind of on both sides with House Bill 545, where it was clear that the individuals who really wanted this to pass cared very deeply about serving, especially the military population and the veteran population, people with PTSD. And I think that, in retrospect, I can look back and, some of the concerns were, we have such a mental health crisis happening in Idaho. Why wouldn't we just push through more licenses to people? And so I guess, even though I know you were against the bill, why, playing devil's advocate a little bit, but why wouldn't we just push through and get more people licensed?
Sure. I think, and we've discussed this too, does it really serve people? Does it keep people safe, in the counseling process? I think we've discussed before, if people are misdiagnosed, then they could have the wrong intervention applied and actually be harmed, so that's a problem. That's something that needs to be protected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have one more question on House Bill 545, and then
Sure.
and then we can move on. But one of the things I was really pleased at both hearings that I was able to provide testimony, that they took us seriously, but to some degree at the end of the day, it did seem like the fact that we diagnosed didn't seem to be nearly a sticking point, which I would have thought would have been. We brought out our big giant DSM, we showed it, and in the end, we did get the feedback that, counseling isn't as much a science. And so therefore, these are the individuals who voted in favor of it, although it didn't get out of the Senate Commerce Committee. I don't know how we advocate against that idea that we are a pseudoscience or not a science at all. Mm-hmm. Do you have some ideas, among your colleagues, about how do we maintain our professional identity that we are?
I think that is the whole idea of like diagnosing as a science and providing evidence-based interventions is not really well known. I don't think that's in the public conversation so much. So I think keep educating, continue to educate people, bring that up as often as possible, so people begin to go, okay, there's something more to this. Yeah, and really start you wanting to hear more about it. Mm-hmm. I think another thing that I tried to do, and I think it resonated somewhat, not as much as I would like, is just to incorporate examples. Mm-hmm. Okay. Of like a situation. Let's say someone has been diagnosed as borderline personality disorder. Mm-hmm. So what's the correct? What intervention? What maybe the highest percentage intervention? Yeah. To use there. And to present it that way. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that people begin to understand how you're thinking. Yeah. Another thing that I tried to do is to use examples from other people's profession. So, for example, in this case here, I felt like what this law was trying to do is it was trying to, again, leverage a statute to make it do something that it wasn't designed to do. Yeah. And as an example, I felt like what this law was trying to do is say something like this. For example, let's say you were a paralegal in the military. That was your job doing paralegal. You did it for 20 years. You
Yep.
did it fantastic. You get out of the military, you become a resident of Idaho, and then you decide that because of this law that you could, with your experience, you ought to be able to practice law. So you
Absolutely.
don't have to sit for the bar,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
those kinds of examples.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So that people begin to realize. It's funny. One of the legislators that voted in favor of the bill, we had conversation later at another time, and he was talking about another situation and he's a licensed person in another profession, and he felt like it was getting short shrifted, And I looked at him and I said, that kind of reminds me of 545.
Yes.
And he went, the light bulb went on.
Yeah. When people can relate to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, if you don't know enough about our profession, or you think it's just talk, that's all we do is sort
we
of
just talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then it could be easy to sort of say, this is, 4 stars. Let's get these great chaplains with a lot of experience. Let's get them licensed. And so I really appreciate what you're saying, which is education and education throughout the year, because when you're in session, how much time do you have to sort of know all the bills?
Yeah, it's a race. Yeah, we're on roller skates. Running through to various committees. Just meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Let's shift over to talking about the Counseling Compact. So in 2024, the Idaho Counseling Association tried. We were so close. We lost by 1 vote on the Senate side. In getting this passed. And it was sort of a difficult season anyway, because there was another counseling bill that was sort of, causing a little competition with it. But ultimately, it didn't pass. And so we have a lobbyist who helps advise us. And, the advice has been, let's hang tight. Let's see how things shake out. Well, the last couple of years, it hasn't been a good time to reintroduce the Counseling Compact. And we're not sure about 2027. We have an upcoming election. We'll talk about that more towards the end. But what are your thoughts? Well, let me preface it by asking this. Some of the feedback we got in 2024 was legislators were just really concerned about Idaho losing sovereignty, especially over the licensing, for counselors. Can you talk to me a little bit about, what are your concerns with a counseling compact?
Yeah, I haven't had a lot of conversation about this topic, and I haven't read the bill, so I don't, and I wasn't around in 2024, I don't know what happened there. But I understand that concern, and as I was reading through some of this, I thought about that also. Is that that our licensing authority, which would be IDOPL, would remain that, and also in terms of like discipline, if there's any need for that, that they would be the main body for that wouldn't be yielded to some sort of interstate agency. That would take over those duties for Idaho. So that would be a concern for me. And then also, I guess, is just thinking in terms of like the job that IDOPL does, or what Idaho Counseling Association does, to make sure that our standards match standards in another state.
Yeah, absolutely.
That there's,
So I appreciate you saying it, and that's to be able to sort of dispel some of the myths around the compact itself. So while it is its own entity, and I know the executive director, that's what sort of makes this fun, is to be able to meet these people, just like you described with working in a big organization. I know Greg Searles, and one of the biggest things is Idaho continues to maintain the ability to discipline any counselor who practices in Idaho, or who has an Idaho license. And currently, IDOPL is able to do that because people from other states, we currently have interstate privileges that are available that does not benefit Idahoans or Idaho counselors. It benefits California counselors who for $30 can practice in Idaho. And as you know, our license renewal fee is about $120 for 1 year. But for $30, people can practice in the state of Idaho. However, they do have to abide by our laws, and IDOPL does manage that. The counseling compact would be the same, only we can choose which states we want to be able to practice in. But anybody who chooses Idaho still has to abide by Idaho laws. And so if somebody put in a complaint, IDOPL would handle that complaint
Right.
if it had to do with anybody who was practicing with an Idaho license. The other thing that I heard that came out of 2024 were legislators were concerned about, what if Idaho counselors join the compact and they don't want to have to abide by laws that maybe are happening in another state like Vermont? And I just wanted to make sure that you understood that, and can tell your colleagues that one of the great things about the Counseling Compact is it's not like a free-for-all that we just get to practice in all 50 states. We actually would have to pay a fee and pick which states. So I personally know, like, okay, well, Utah and Texas might be the states I'd want to practice in. If you had what advice would you give us if we were to try to get this through again? Is there anything that, any strategies to help us?
I would begin the conversation like right now.
Okay.
If you were planning on doing it next year, I would begin the conversation right now, and so that whoever you choose as a sponsor,
Yep.
that person would have time to begin to reach out to other people and see what concerns were.
Okay.
I'd also like to see what the consensus is from Idaho counselors, like in terms of like the population of Idaho counselors, how many are for it or not.
That's a great idea. Yeah. I feel like the Idaho Counseling Association has a great pulse in terms of our membership and being able to find that. And then we could provide a number. This is the percentage. Personally, I know this impacts me when I have people who work in transportation positions. So I currently have somebody who works in a transportation position, lives in another state, and is required to attend counseling. But because they have an established relationship with me, they fly in once a month for their counseling. And certainly they don't do it begrudgingly. But in my mind, I think, my goodness, we have telehealth for a reason.
Yeah.
And while you're no longer an Idahoan, I'd love to maintain that care. Also for our young people who transition to college, for them to have that maintenance, especially if you were their counselor in high school, when they move off to, go to Washington.
That's it. That's interesting. I wonder, did you explore anything like, if a person, let's say this relationship you just described, if you were to do that via telehealth, if there could be anything embedded where that person, when they enter into a counseling contract with you, and even though they're doing it via telehealth, for intents and purposes of that relationship, they are a resident of Idaho.
Yeah,
But they become a resident of Idaho.
Yeah, absolutely not. So, ethically speaking, I think it's ethically and also legally, if they are located one toe is outside of the state of Idaho, I cannot proceed. And this is where we've had counselors, especially where suicide comes into place, where if somebody is in Oregon and they're in crisis and they call their counselor in Idaho, we've had one counselor who self-reported herself because she ethically knew she was going to provide the crisis care needed for that individual. But legally, she was operating outside of her license by providing that telesession for this individual in crisis.
Yeah.
These are the things that I think a compact just gives us a little more peace of mind. And I have had legislators say, just get a license from that state. And it's not ezy.
Not that easy.
If you've been to one state licensing, you've been to one state licensing. I looked at Montana and I was like, no, I just don't have capacity.
The requirements could be drastically different.
Exactly. Yes. So, well, thanks for chatting with me about the compact.
Yeah.
And I think that is what we want to do, is to continue these conversations with legislators just to help set minds at ease. And so, thank you. Turning our attention now to Medicaid. So this last session we saw there was a lot of conversations around cuts. And actually we did see some services that were restored by the end of the session. It was kind of a miracle. We were happy to see it. And I know that you're in a really difficult position in balancing a budget and also knowing the benefit that Medicaid provides for mental health, especially among some of the most underserved individuals. Especially coming from Nampa, which has a high population of individuals that utilize Medicaid benefits. And from Idaho Counseling Association, we have a lot of providers where this is the backbone of their clinics and of their workforce. Can you help me understand where are we headed in terms of Medicaid and sort of seeing both sides of this tale?
It depends on which program you're talking about, like which stripe of Medicaid. You know, if you're talking about Medicaid expansion, which is probably going to be the most relevant to this conversation. I'm not personally a big fan of Medicaid expansion. I'd rather see those kinds of services get funded differently. But
And can I just clarify Medicaid expansion? Because some people might not quite understand. These are going to be individuals that qualify that have maybe upper levels of income, but because of expansion that happened, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, more individuals qualify for Medicaid. It's sort of, we're talking about this population. Is that the expansion? Is that
no, the expansion population are able-bodied adults that live below, I think it's 135% of below
federal poverty
federal
guideline?
poverty
Okay.
level. Yeah, and so that's the expansion.
Okay.
Group.
Okay.
And what's difficult about that program is that when it actually was voted on, I think in 2019, I think it didn't get really put into play until 21. But it was originally estimated to cost the state $400 million a year. And and it's a 90-10 program. In other words, federal government pays 90%, and Idaho taxpayers pay the other 10%. Well, today that program has grown to $1.3 billion a year. So it's 3 times its original estimate. So when we're having problems with balancing the budget, and we're obligated to, it's in the Idaho Constitution, that we want if we're at a point where we are unable with the revenue that we're collecting, to cover all the programs that we have in progress, then we have to do one of two things. We either have to raise taxes or we need to cut the programs, And so this is an area that I would like to see funded differently because I think it's going to be, if things do get really, if they get worse in terms of like that balance between revenue and programs that we pay for, that this is going to be one of the first.
Okay.
So people are going to get hit, with that. So, so what was your original question then?
How then do we advocate? I think that this was one of the ones we heard back from some legislators. Yeah.
So what I think that one way to help with that is to keep the expenses down. I'd like to see it funded differently, but as long as we're in it in the arrangement that we're in, to keep the expenses down is to if there's any like fraud or inefficiencies that you notice, to report those so that we can improve the program, make it cost less for what it does, and then we can keep it longer.
Okay. I think that's helpful. I know that there's a lot of, people who graduate from their programs and then go to work at agencies that primarily serve Medicaid populations. This is where people are able to accumulate a lot of hours to get their big C. So we certainly know there's a need for it.
Yes.
Otherwise, these individuals wouldn't go work at those clinics.
Yes.
And
God bless them. We had so many people come into our offices at the early part of this last session, speech pathologists, audiologists, anybody who are working with, the low-income population. And they're very concerned that they would be able to stay in business, to continue to serve.
Absolutely. I think that the mental health of the providers itself are also, there was a hit that was taken this last session. Again, there was a little bit of light at the end in that expansion wasn't rolled back. And we did see some programs restored that we knew were helpful, especially among people with substance use disorders and severe and persistent mental health disorders. Anything else? Now, I know May 19th is kind of a big day for you. Can you describe a little bit about what the election cycle looks like for you and how what information you'd like to get out to our members?
Well, yeah, May 19th is the primary, and I'm a Republican, and in Idaho, in a lot of districts, the primary is the election.
Yeah.
Because just in terms of sheer numbers, the Democrats don't hold enough of the population. They don't have the voting percentage, So whoever wins the primary typically wins. So that's a big thing.
Yeah.
And I think I have a proven record. I've shown that I'm not only a conservative, but I've been able to work with people. In my 2 years that I've been there, I've been able to get 8 laws, 8 bills signed into law.
Yeah.
So that shows, I think, that I know how to work with people And what I think this last year showed is that if constituents come to me with a concern, that I could work with them to shape that into something and turn it into law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate your service to Idaho, and we
you.
also appreciate that you're a counselor.
Yeah.
And so I've got to say, it feels a little bit like having an insider in terms of being able to have someone who understands our thinking, as well as who, it holds a position of power, because certainly you do hold a position of power. Well, thank you so much for all that you do, and I appreciate you being part of this legislative forum. And for all of you watching, we really appreciate you being a member of the Idaho Counseling Association. Everything that we do is to help support our profession. And so we encourage you to get involved with all the many committees we have at the Idaho Counseling Association, including the Public Policy and Legislative Committee, which is most active during the legislative session. But certainly, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to policy@idahocounseling.org. That sounds right, idahocounseling.org. And have a wonderful rest of your day.